Welcome to a special edition of the ADC Sports Podcast. My name is Sam Fred. I'm the founder and editor at Around the Northeast Corner, covering 30 schools across Northeast Indiana and parts of Elkhart County. I'm here alongside Mason Asher. And Mason, we are down to just 2 weekends of girls basketball remaining, and from there we will be able to crown some state champions. Mason, what are your thoughts now as we get to this portion of the state tournament, as we get to semi-state?
Well, my first thought when I just walked inside about an hour ago was, man, I'm glad today's not Saturday because I don't think that the regional games would be done until Monday if we had to deal with the snow that we're dealing with, across parts of Indiana today. But I'm excited. Going over the semi-state pairings earlier this afternoon into this evening, I think even though it was a blind draw, I think that the draw worked out pretty much as perfectly as you could have probably guessed and hoped that it would. There aren't many games that you kind of wished was going to be set up for an evening contest. I think if you really wanted to assign seeds 1 through 4 to teams in all of the regionals essentially across the state, I think you could, and I think you would see that most of the time it's going to be number 1 playing number 4, and number 2 playing number 3 if you look at the teams on paper. So I think that just really sets up for a really interesting morning, and then if there are no big upsets, a really fun Saturday night.
Yes, that is for sure. And speaking of fun Saturday night, we want to start off with our semi-state preview by taking a look at Class 4A, and I think this is the class that I think there's the most anticipation for and excitement. I guess the only unfortunate thing is, for at least for 4A North, is they're going to have to go down to Frankfort, just south of Kokomo, for these teams to take place and finish inside a 4A semi-state champion here. Hamilton Southeastern Valparaiso is the 10 a.m. game. Warsaw against McCutcheon is the 12 o'clock game. 7:30 p.m. is the championship game between the winner of those two contests. I think when you look at this matchup on paper, you see right away a lot of superstars on this particular side of the bracket, with Maya Makaleski of Hamilton Southeastern, Lillian Barnes of Valparaiso. You have the trio of talented players in Warsaw and Jocelyn Bricker, Brooke Winchester, and Brooke Zartman. And then McCutcheon, you have Lillian Grays here. Mason, your thoughts on these two matchups here?
Yeah, I think they're going to be really fun morning matchups. I think there's probably a clear favorite in both of the games in the morning, but it's not going to be two games where you see blowouts. Obviously, starting with HSC and Valpo up first. HSC's obviously run through the gauntlet this year. Their strength of schedule on the year's third best in the state. They're 14-0 against teams ranked in the top 25 via the Saccharin rating. So obviously, 14 of their wins have come against really, really good competition. I like to look at, who they faced and who the common opponents are. Hamilton Southeastern's 2-0 and Valpo is 0-2 against common opponents. HSC has beaten Lawrence North and Noblesville, both in close games. And Valpo lost a close game to Noblesville and got handled pretty easily by Lawrence North. So, you can kind of take a look at, those types of things when you're trying to, piece together what might happen. And so HSC, kind of has had the edge there. They're more battle tested than Valpo. But Valparaiso does have Lillian Barnes, who is one of the better players in the state, regardless of class. And so that should be a really interesting game, just to see how Valpo can look to slow down HSC's offensive attack. Obviously, Homestead wasn't too successful in doing so this past weekend, but it's just something else to prepare for HSC and Valpo. And then going to Warsaw and McCutcheon, I think this could be actually a really, really solid game. Warsaw's 24-1 this year. They just beat South Bend Washington in relatively easy fashion. It was a 10-point game, but you never really thought that South Bend, Washington was going to, end up pulling away or, kind of getting back into that game late. Warsaw obviously didn't have the offensive output that they're used to this year. But they played really, really solid defense against South Bend, Washington, holding to 43 points. And as we know, South Bend, Washington is a team that can, throw out points. For me, this is going to be, a really interesting matchup because I've talked about how Warsaw hasn't played that, tough of a schedule. And they really have not. They've only played 6 games against top 25 teams. However, McCutcheon's only played 2 games against top 25 teams this year, and they're 0-2. Again, looking at, common opponents type stuff, I think the biggest one we can look at is they've both played Columbia City. Warsaw beat Columbia City by 15, and then McCutcheon lost to them by 10. Against common opponents, Warsaw's 3-0, McCutcheon's 2-2. A couple of those matchups were early in the season, so you can't really look at that. But that's going to be a really fun matchup between Lily Graves, who's probably the top 2027 in the state of Indiana. And then, as you mentioned, Warsaw kind of has a trio of kids that they can go to, defensively and for points. So, just these two matchups are going to kind of be the same where, HSC and Warsaw both have kind of a trio of kids that, can really get it done. And then Valpo and McCutcheon both have one kid who, stands out quite a bit from the rest of the team, but they also have role players who play their roles really well, can score 10 or 15 points if they need to, and just see how that, kind of matriculates together on Saturday.
Defense to her offense. She averages around 5 steals per game. Her 3-point shooting is not the greatest right now as a sophomore. So if you're the Warsaw Tigers, like how do you contain a Lillian Graves type of player? And if you're McCutcheon, how do you slow down this juggernaut of a Warsaw team that, oh yeah, by the way, Alexis Neely could come in and she can put up a decent performance herself.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it all comes together. I think in the end, whoever makes it to the semi-state game, the final game at night, is going to just be, obviously battle tested, but it should set up for a really, really good and fun matchup that night.
Mm-hmm. Over to the southern half of the bracket in 4A, you have Pike against Bloomington South, Gibson Southern against Lawrence North Mason. This is, I think we looked at both of these games, and I think we could see a coin toss in either of those matchups. So, Mason, when you look at the southern half of the bracket, Southport, I think any of these 4 teams, I think has a legitimate shot of getting to stay. I mean, at this point, everybody's good, but I think when you look at this South semi-state pairings, I think they each one of these teams has a fighting chance of getting to the state finals.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's not a lot of separation, as you mentioned, between these 4 teams. Obviously, we're going to get a new representative from 4A South. Gibson Southern still on, kind of their, repeat, I guess you'd say, to defend their title, although that title was in 3A last year. But yeah, looking at that first matchup, Pike is battle tested. They're peaking right at the right time. Their strength of schedule is 6th in the state. They're 3-6 against top 25 teams. As we mentioned, they kind of struggled at times throughout the season, but have rattled off some really, really nice wins here over the last 2 weeks once we got into state tournament play. Bloomington South, they're probably a year ahead of schedule. They've got a really nice roster of juniors and freshmen. Julia Lashley has been playing really well for them this year. But again, I go back to the strength of schedule portion. they're 107th strength of schedule. They're only 1-1 against top 25 teams in the state, and they've only played 4 top 64 teams in the state. And all the other 4A teams have played 10 to 15 or more up to this point. So I'm really interested to see how when you get in this environment, which a lot of these Pike kids are used to, these big game environments. I'm really interested to see how it plays out. Is Bloomington South's talent going to win out, or is Pike's experience, in their toughness from going through the gauntlet that they have so far this year, going to win out? Which brings us to Gibson Southern and Lawrence North, and that game is such a toss-up. I've mentioned a couple of times how if you've got two Division I kids, as Gibson Southern does, and Gabby Spink and Paige Schnaus, you can kind of win any game that's sitting there for you. But Lawrence North has the same, and like Pike, Lawrence North is very battle tested. They've got the 5th strength of schedule this year, and they're 4-6 against top 25 teams. Whereas Gibson Southern is 0-2 against top 25 teams, with the 47th ranked strength of schedule in the state. And you go to the common opponents. Lawrence North is 1-1 against common opponents. Gibson Southern is 0-2. Both have lost to Silver Creek, and then Lawrence North beat Fishers, while Gibson Southern lost to Fishers. So really, there's not a ton of information you can draw from that one, given that the Fishers games were so early in the season. Obviously, since then the teams have changed, but this is going to be a really, really fun matchup between two teams that have all the tools to make it to Saturday night, and then even on to next weekend to Gamebridge Fieldhouse.
Yeah, and as we're going to talk about as a recurring theme throughout semi-state at this point, you're at this point now where it comes down to which team is best conditioned for this type of semi-state and which team can actually make the shots or make the most plays defensively. Because at this point, a lot of the teams that you're going to be seeing here in all 4 classifications, a lot of these matchups are very similar in terms of the way they want to play and the way they want to dictate play. I want to shift down to Class 3A, and 3A North is very familiar territory for me at Huntington North, as I cover Norwell and Columbia City on a daily basis. And before I got on the air here with you, Mason, I talked with Eric Thornton of the Norwell Knights, and he talked about like, hey, look, this team has progressed over the years, and this is a young team. It's an inexperienced team, and nobody thought we would get to the state finals after the way we went through last year and having to graduate so many of those players from last year. And he talked about the progression of Vanessa Rossform as a point guard, having to transition to that new role and how she has thrived in that new role, and then all the role players coming in. In the game against East Snowball, Ashley Woolman had 18 points in that contest and 6 triples as East Snowball made 14 threes in that game against East Snowball, and East Snowball turned the ball over 28 times against Norwell. This was a team that had to learn how to deal with those mistakes and then learn from it. You're seeing it right now as a team that's playing some great basketball right now, but he did note the matchup against Delta is a challenging matchup for Norwell because Jillian Barr is averaging 16 points per game, 10 rebounds, and 4 steals, and that's a player that provides something that Norwell doesn't usually have. They don't have that a lot of size in the post, other than Olivia Green. They don't really showcase that type of size in the post per se. And then Delta's got 2 players that can shoot the 3 ball, Addison Barnes and then Griffin Knight. Then you get to Columbia City, and they've had a similar run with the Eagles having lost quite a few of their players from last year, although Addison Baxter is on this team this year. And so far this year with Columbia City, we have seen a team that's kind of rallied along the teams from the past years to be able to get to their first semi-state in 25 years through their defense, through their press, through their hard work, and then Addie Baxter just being Addie Baxter in terms of a playmaker as she is. But I will note this too with the match against Highland. Highland has a player of their own in Jordan Steele who's averaging 25 points, and she's kind of very similar in a way to an Addison Baxter who can will her team to a victory. So your thoughts, Mason? Because I think these are 2. We look at this semi-state and say, well, Norwell and Columbia City should clash for the championship, but I do think we have to be a little bit careful about looking ahead, considering I think Highland has the team that can compete with Columbia City, and then Delta has a little bit of size that can match with Norwell in the post.
Yeah, I think for I think it sets up. I don't think anyone would disagree that it does completely set up for a Columbia City Norwell semi-state final game. However, it's not going to be something where you know who's going to win at halftime necessarily. You mentioned Jordan Steele with Highland. She's scoring almost 26 points a game this year. Like, you really are going to have to shut her down. She's going to take, the majority of their shots. So if you want to beat Highland, you're going to have to slow her down. Um, I think that Columbia City has shown that they can slow down high volume scorers from other teams so far this year. They've played a really good schedule to prepare them for this state finals run, potentially. And Highland's strength of schedule is 270th ranked in the state. So this is going to be the best team, in Columbia City that they're facing this year. So I think, as long as Columbia City does end up slowing down Jordan Steele, they should, take a pretty easy win going into Saturday night. Now, obviously, nothing's guaranteed, but that's just, my kind of thoughts on, looking at both teams, having seen both teams this year. Norwell might have a little bit tougher of a time with Delta. You mentioned Jillian Barr averaging almost 17 points a game. She's shooting over 50% from the field. But then they've also got Griffin Knight and Addie Barnes, who are also averaging double digits on the year so far. And all three of those kids are juniors. So, kind of like Bloomington South, Delta might be kind of a year ahead of schedule with, where they thought they might be. And they've played some solid teams this year so far. The common opponent for Norwell and Delta has been Jay County. Norwell obviously beat Jay County pretty handily by 55 points. But so did Delta. They beat Jay County by 31, and then in sectional they beat them by 21, I think. So, they have blowout wins over their common opponent. I think Delta can push Norwell a little bit. And I think it's going to be closer than people might expect. But I think we're just, sitting here and expecting, at least I'm expecting to see a Norwell and Columbia City game on Saturday night.
Yes, and I do think with Delta and Highland, it's going to come down to number one with Delta. The big thing when you're always playing against Norwell is the 1-3-1. The 1-3 zone is something, and I know Brendan Ice has talked to me about this when I talked to his team about looking ahead to that match against Norwell. He said, "Look, we don't have the kids to replicate that type of 1-3-1 because not only you have to deal with the zone and their trap, but you got this Vanessa Rossford coming in at the top of that 1-3-1, and you don't have a player like the Vanessa Rossford to replicate and simulate that type of defensive pressure." And I know Delta has not seen something like this before, per se. So that could be one thing that could hinder them a little bit. And I think the other thing for Delta is obviously transition defense is going to have to be key. And then for Highland, the big thing for Highland obviously is going to have to be able to handle their pressure. And Columbia City has played a difficult schedule, but they've been able to, even the sectional and regionals, they've been able to beat teams pretty handily because of their defense, speeding the game up to the point where they're just making mistakes and they're making erratic decisions and they're turning the ball over and they're just causing all that type of chaos. I do wonder if Steele for Highland doesn't have one of her typical games. Does this expose Highland a little bit in terms of their ability to take care of the basketball and maybe Columbia City can utilize their speed to their advantage in that matchup? I think those are going to be key things to watch. But if we get that Norwell Columbia City matchup, I mean, this, Mason, it would be a massive showdown to see who would represent the northern part of the state, two conference rivals, two major powerhouse programs in Northeast Indiana at Huntington North in the same conference. These two met in December, and Columbia City won that game 74-67. So that this could be one of those tremendous games that it makes all fans just excited for. But obviously, you got to win those first games for that to happen. The southern half of that matchup in 3A, you look at Indy Cathedral, Indy Roncalli. That's a pretty big rivalry in the Indianapolis metro area there. Greensburg against Evansville Central is the second game at New Albany. And we kind of anticipate on paper for both of these games to be very competitive games. And, Greensburg last time out against Washington had a pretty difficult regional game against Washington. But what are your thoughts with Evansville Central and then the two Indy schools?
Yeah, so I think Evansville Central's coming into this is a little bit of an underdog there in the South. They're not talked about too much. Um, they're really good, led by Maddie Shirley, who's when I watch her play, she has one of the best mid-range games I've seen in a long time. She can just kind of go to work and score the ball from anywhere on the floor. She's consistent. She's I wouldn't say too similar of a player to Katie Reed from Washington, but size wise, they are pretty similar. And Greensburg held Katie Reed to 0 points until about 3 minutes left in the game. So Greensburg is very good defensively. They're going to have a really good game plan to play against Evansville Central. Evansville Central, besides Shirley, who's averaging 25 points a game this year. Maya Skelton is also averaging double figures. She's a really solid point guard. And then Olivia Heil is another forward for Evansville Central who's averaging just under 10 points a game. The question I have, though, and I, even though I have said that I thought Greensburg would win the 3A state championship essentially all year long, against Washington, they only played 5 players. Their starting point guard, Mary Harmon, is out with a injury right now. I talked with her earlier today. She will not be back for this game or, obviously the night game, provided they make it there. She's hopeful that she can get back by the state championship game, again, if they make it there. And that's, a really tough blow for Greensburg. She's not going to be one of those kids who are going to come out and score 10, 12, 15 points a game. But she's someone who really sets up the offense and runs it well, plays with energy. And, watching them play against Washington, you could tell how much they missed her on the floor. Claire Larison for Greensburg, Miley Wilkinson, Leah West, they've kind of got a 3-headed monster there of kids who can score the ball. And so, I think that this game's going to be a really close and competitive game. Going up to Cathedral and Roncalli, the first game of the morning, they play essentially the same teams all year long, but they just don't play each other. Cathedral 7-2 against common opponents. Roncalli's 4-4 against common opponents. They haven't played since 2021, so they haven't played in 4 years, but they've played 21 times over the past 20 years. So these are teams that usually end up matching up at some point. And I think this is going to be, a really competitive game. Roncalli has Elliot Leffler, who's averaging 17 points a game, a really solid 2-3 type player who can shoot the ball, get to the rim. He's really smooth with it. And then Brenna Cerny is a smaller guard who can also score it at a pretty high rate. And then Cathedral, I've talked about her before, Jada Wilson, a really athletic, high motor wing who is a really solid kid when she gets downhill going to the basket. Caroline Wiggins, a freshman for Cathedral, has played really well all year long. And then Tiana Guy is kind of the player for them that sets the table. She's averaging 9.5 points a game. She's their point guard. They're gonna press you and make you make mistakes, but I think Roncalli's got the guards to kind of handle the ball and handle the pressure. And, they've, both of these teams have had, a really solid year thus far, played really tough competition. And I think that it's essentially a carbon copy of one another. So both of these games, I think, have the potential to be, instant classics. And then same for that night game. Whoever makes it through to the semi-state championship game down there at New Albany Saturday night, that's going to be another great game. And whoever comes out of the 3A South is going to definitely deserve to do so.
Yeah, I think 3A has a lot of interesting storylines here, especially if 3A North does become a Norwell Columbia City rematch. We could have 3A could be something we will probably should have our eyes on in the night game if things do play out like we think it might. But I think 3A is a pretty solid class at this point in the semi-state round. I want to shift down to Class 2A. at Logansport, aka the Berry Bowl. How about this for a first game at Logansport? The Whitco Wildcats and the Eastside Blazers. The Whitco Wildcats came into the state tournament completely overlooked by everyone. We were caught up with the Bluffton Tigers and this tremendous team, tremendous season. And hey, even Coach Jordan said as well, like he said, like, I wouldn't blame you. Like, Bluffton's having a tremendous season themselves, and he had all the respect in the world for Doug Curtis. And he said, hey, someone had to win that game, and it's too bad someone had to lose that game. And frankly, Whitco played great in that sectional against Woodland, South Adams, and then obviously in the third and fourth quarter against Bluffton. And in the regional against Bremen, he talked about the Bremen zone that they ran against the Whitco. They ran a zone that kind of went down to the volleyball line, and Bremen kind of caused Whitco some trouble there to get some offense going, and Whitco struggled with the rebounds in that first half and whatnot. And so he said there had to have been an adjustment to be made there, but he said, we like the way we adapted in that second half, and we were able to finish it off in that game against the Bremen Lions, who he said they're a very well coached team. But when talking to both Whitco and Bremen, not Bremen, Whitco and Eastside, I should say, both coaches admitted, like, hey, we're very similar to each other in a lot of ways. We play fast. We're very aggressive defensively. We got players that can make plays and shoot the basketball at a high rate and whatnot. And I think what it really boils down to this matchup for me is, number one, can the Eastside Blazers contest the high range shooting ability of Whitco and contain the Stonebreakers? And then for Whitco's perspective is can they obviously rebound and take care of the basketball well enough against the Eastside team that generally averages or forces opponents to average 24, 25 turnovers per game? That's going to be the key factors in that matchup. And then you look at the other side of that matchup, you got Rensselaer Central and Sheridan. And Alexandria, but Rensselaer Central was down 1 point with under 4 minutes to go in the game. Rensselaer Central finished the game on a 9-0 run. And you look at the Bombers, Mason, you got 5 players that can score at any given moment with Camry Rowland, Brody Racky, Taylor Van Meter, right? This is and Courtney Matthew. This is a team of Rensselaer Central that's deep in terms of their scoring around their starting 5. They can shoot the 3 well at 30%. They average 30 rebounds per game, and they generally take care of the basketball well, which is going to be key here against the Sheridan Blackhawks, which we've talked about all year as kind of the darlings of 2A, and Kenzie Garner is the player. We talked about Sheridan. Kenzie Garner makes it all happen for Sheridan, averaging 21 points per game. When Kenzie Garner goes, Sheridan goes as well. So I think we have potentially 2 very exciting games in 2A North, especially Whitco and Eastside, which is going to be fast-paced and physical. Your thoughts on 2A North?
Yeah, I think 2A North is going to be really good. I think they're both going to be super competitive games. It's probably where I'll end up that morning, just because I think the matchups are going to be fascinating to watch. Speaking first on Sheridan and Rensselaer Central, you mentioned, Rensselaer Central's got 5 kids who can score the ball, led by Camry Rowland with, just over 15 points a game. They take on Sheridan now, who is going to be very similar to Alexandria. In terms of they're going to be pretty reliant on one player for most of their offense. Obviously, with Alexandria, it was Jacqueline Hosier. Here now with Sheridan, it's Kenzie Garner. Cecilia Timmy and Brielle Garner also, shoulder a bit of the load for Sheridan. But it's really going to be, how does Rensselaer Central slow down Kenzie Garner? Her and Jacqueline Hosier from Alexandria are 2 fairly different players, where Kenzie takes more of a, at times scoring load. She's a bit better 3-point shooter, can kind of hurt you more so from all 3 levels. Rensselaer Central has a super tough defense. They'll press you, they'll trap you, they'll try to make you, try to force mistakes. But, I think from that vantage point, I could see a lower scoring game than maybe expected. But if Rensselaer Central, is on their game defensively, and can get out and kind of run like they want to, and they're knocking down their shots, this is a game where, Rensselaer Central could potentially pull away if Kenzie Garner's, not, doing what she needs to do. Um, and then as far as Whitco at Eastside, I totally agree with what Coach Jordan said. Whitco was kind of an afterthought coming in to sectional, just because of the sectional that they played in. But that's why you play the games, and they're sitting here in 2A North now, getting ready to play Eastside, and I think this one, much like Sheridan and Rensselaer Central, has potential to be a really really excellent matchup. Any combination of these four teams in the evening portion of 2A North also has the potential to be, a really solid matchup. And when I was looking through common foes for both Whitco and Eastside, there was nothing really tangible that I could pull out because Eastside is 11-0 and Whitco 7-0 against common opponents. So they're taking care of business, as they have all year long. Their strength of schedules are almost identical. I think it's going to be a really fun, even matchup. And all three of these games, I wouldn't be surprised of any three of the or any three games of any of their results. I think any of these four teams could come and represent 2A North.
Yeah, and expect the first game to have a pretty exciting atmosphere. Waco brought a nice crowded cast in, and they were electric. And Coach Jordan admitted to me that was a very loud atmosphere with full of alumni and former players at Whitco that were excited to be a part of this run. And then Coach Lordy, Eastside travels well too, so you're gonna see a lot of Eastside fans there as well. But I want to ask you, I want to say a couple of things here before we move on. But I think the couple of things to look out for in that Whitco game: Allie Brown and Whitco against Lily Crusher of Eastside in the post. What can Allie Brown do to frustrate Lily Crusher inside? Try to get Crusher in foul trouble because Lily Crusher is a key part, not only with her offense, but also her defense. When Lily Crusher is on the floor, Eastside is a 10 times better basketball team when she's on the floor, and she's one of those players that they need on the floor for all the intangibles there. And I think the other thing for Whitco is how well do they adapt to the ever constant changing of defensive formations with Eastside and how well they can manage the bench of Whitco. I think those are things to keep an eye on as potential X factors for that matchup there. Shifting over to 2A South, there's another couple of very fascinating games down in Jasper. Park Heritage and South Knott's is the 10 a.m. game. Brownstown Central. Heritage Christian is the noon game. On paper, many would say South Knott's and Brownstown Central, but you warned me during the sectional preview, Heritage Christian is a team to really keep an eye on as a dark horse. And I think right now, when you look at this matchup, we cannot underestimate the potential of an upset like a Heritage Christian.
Yeah, I think Heritage Christian, is really solid. Their record does not do how good of a team they are justice. They're led in scoring by Riley Johnson, a really, really solid freshman, just under 15 points a game. Jocelyn Marshall is a really long and lanky athletic guard who's averaging just under 14 points a game. And then Casey Frost is, a wing who kind of does it all, shoots it pretty efficiently, can rebound it, leads the team in assists. So that's a kid who kind of does it all for them. Brownstown Central is very battle tested. They have a lot of experienced players. They've had some really nice wins this year. They're not maybe as battle tested as Heritage Christian, since Heritage Christian plays a lot of the Indianapolis area schools. But this Brownstown Central team, obviously took down North Posey this past weekend pretty easily. The spread was quite a bit bigger than I expected it to be. And Coach Allman is a really solid coach and will have them ready to compete with Heritage Christian. I think this game could really go any way. I would struggle to find who I think would win this game with any sort of confidence. They have played one common opponent. That was actually Cathedral. Brownstown Central lost to Cathedral by 21 points. Heritage Christian lost to Cathedral by 9 points. So if you want to find a little bit of a difference between the two teams, that's kind of where you have to look, because you're not going to find it a strength of schedule. Both are 104 to 109 in strength of schedule. And so I think it's going to be a really, really fun matchup between these two teams that I wouldn't be surprised if goes either way. As for the first game, Park Heritage, who's had a good year so far, they've beefed up their schedule a little bit this year, playing both Zionsville and McCutcheon. Um, I think that this is still South Knox's, state title to lose, in my opinion. Uh, they are, with Kendall Hill and Bryn Hill and Ella Bobe, they've got three kids who can, score it with the best players in the state. As we saw at the Hall of Fame Classic, um, they played really tough with some of the best teams in the state. And obviously 2A is a completely different story than, the Hall of Fame Classic was. You know, Sagarin rating wise, South Knox is by far the number one team in 2A, but they're also the number 6 team in the state. So they're, on paper better than a team like, Pike and Lawrence North, and teams like that who are still, in semi-state for 4A. So I think for me personally, I think South Knox shouldn't have too much of a problem with Park Heritage, even though Park Heritage has some really nice players. It's just that it's unfortunate for them that they have to face South Knox, and South Knox is just kind of in a completely different area code this year when it comes to 2A. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if they, get a little bit of resistance in the nightcap on Saturday. But I just think that South Knox just has all the tools defensively and offensively to kind of run through that first game and make a good run at the state finals, on Saturday.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the second game, the one thing that Brownstown Central may have going for them is they do have that experience of playing the state finals, and this is an older team. So, Brownstown Central has that experience of being there before in semi state. That could be the one thing that could also help their case as well. Shifting over to Class 1A, we're going to LaPorte in the north. Elkhart Christian, it's Lafayette Central Catholic. North Miami against Marquette Catholic. I'm going to be honest with you, Mason. Looking at this semi state, I think both of these games to me, I think Lafayette Central Catholic and Marquette Catholic are pretty heavy favorites here. I saw ECA play Fremont in that regional game, and ECA had a pretty good start in that first half. They were up as many as 8 points in that contest. They made 5 threes in the first half. They were around 40%, 50% from three. Lily Maxwell ended up with 4 threes and 14 points in that game. But that second half for ECA, it was a grudge. It was a grind getting through that game. And it's only by the skin of their teeth that they're still playing right now because they were 3 for 15 the second half shooting the ball. They only made 2 threes. They turned the ball over 23 times in the whole game in general. If it wasn't for the free throw shooting, we're not talking about ECA playing right now in that regional game. They're going to need the Yorty sisters to play well. They're going to need Clap Saddle to have a decent game as their leading scorer on the season. And then Maxwell's going to have to be able to knock down their shots because when you look at Lafayette Central Catholic, Mason, Central Catholic presses and they're deep, they're athletic, they're a battle tested team. They don't play a lot of teams in their own classification. They have the Thompson sisters on that team. They're very talented as well with Brooke Thompson. She had 15 points in that win against Monroe Central, which to Monroe Central's credit, this was a 6-point game at halftime, and Central Catholic's defense was the reason why they were able to pull away and win by double figures in that contest. And I think when you look at the other contests here with North Miami Marquette Catholic, North Miami, kind of the same thing as Elkhart Christian. Not a lot of star players, but they're scrappy. They played good team basketball, played good defense. But I think to me, when you look at Marquette Catholic, a team that's been to the state before, to me, it's a buzzsaw on paper.
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned it right off the top. I don't think that these two morning games should be single digit games. I think Lafayette Central Catholic, Marquette Catholic are kind of on a beeline to meet in the semi-state finals on Saturday night. You mentioned Lafayette Central Catholic. They just kind of keep coming at you and keep coming at you and keep coming at you. And eventually you wear down and you start making mistakes, and then they capitalize on them. Carly Barrett's really, really solid defensively. Brooke Thompson in the middle of that press is, a long, rangy freshman who can, force bad passes all the time. And then Gracie Bourdonnais is a really quick guard who, doesn't have, I don't think, as much, recognition as she probably should. but she can really score the ball and is actually one of my favorite players to watch so far this season. And like you mentioned, they do play a really tough schedule. Obviously, they play McCutcheon, Rensselaer Central. They've played some really solid schools this year and do not play a lot of 1A schools. And kind of the same with Marquette Catholic. There in the other game, Lania Davis, is averaging just under 20 points per game. Marissa Pleasant is, a really solid guard for them as well, who's averaging just over 8 points a game. With North Miami and Elkhart Christian, I think it's going to take a monumental upset for both of those teams to upset one of these two, on Saturday morning.
Yeah, I just think well, the entire postseason we've talked about Marquette Catholic and Central Catholic are kind of at a crash course of meeting for the night game of that championship. And if these two were to meet, I think, boy, we're talking about a showdown, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The championship type of game. It'll feel like a true state championship game in a way because of just how much parity they are between those two teams. And then you look at the southern half of the bracket, kind of similar in a way, although I don't think it's quite as lopsided in the southern half of the bracket with South Decatur and Borden, Anderson Prep, and Northeast Du Bois. Mason, you've been riding high on Borden this entire postseason. South Decatur, battle-tested team, has made a nice run to semi-state, and then Anderson Prep, much like Elkhart Christian, first time playing in semi-state for them. What are your thoughts on that other half of the 1A bracket?
Yeah, so I think, still, as I've said all year, I think this is Borden's half of the state to lose. I think, South Decatur's had a really nice run, but still I go back to, they weren't even one of the top two teams in their sectional. They've just really started playing well the last couple of weeks. They're led by Michaela Summers and Paige McQueen, who combined to average about 20 points a game. And they play a Borden team who can really score the ball, when they need to. If you look at the common opponents, because there are a couple of common opponents here for South Decatur and Borden. So South Decatur beat Crothersville 55-14, and Borden beat Crothersville 76-15. So that's, obviously about the same score for Crothersville, but Borden obviously offensively was getting, a little bit more stuff from their team. And then in Henryville game, Borden beat them by 30, and then in sectional they beat them by 17. South Decatur actually lost to Henryville this year, so Borden holds 2 blowout wins, and then South Decatur ended up losing to Henryville. So I think this is going to be a game where South Decatur has to have everything go perfect for them. They have to stop Riley Rarick. They have to stop Ava Wheeler. Borden's got 3 or 4 kids who can score the ball as well. I think this is definitely going to be an uphill battle. And then for Anderson Prep and Northeast Du Bois, I think Anderson Prep, kind of got the luck of the draw where, they won the worst sectional in the state and then had to take on the winner of the second worst sectional in the state. Congratulations to them for getting to semi-state, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 40-point win for Northeast Du Bois. Olivia Peoples for Anderson Prep is a really solid player, averaging 22 points a game, shooting well from the floor at over 50%, actually averaging a double-double with over 10 rebounds a game. But for Anderson Prep, that's really about it. So if, she gets slowed down, and if Anderson Prep kind of gets behind the 8 ball per se early on against Northeast Du Bois, I wouldn't be shocked really to see running clock early in the second half. Whereas Northeast Du Bois has a couple different kids that can score, and Bella Cummins, Lily Schnell, and then Emerson Kolb, who leads them in scoring with just right at 17 points a game. So, I think, both of the 1A regionals or semi-states are set up for a crash course between, 2 really good teams in Saturday night's 2 games.
Yeah, and as we wrap up the semi-state preview, I do want to ask you one final question. We don't need to do predictions here at this point because I think at least The matchups in terms of pairings went about exactly as we expected. Venues for the most part pretty well. What are some things that you're most looking forward to as we transition to semi-state and we look ahead to the 2-round semi-state, which is, I would say, it's the hardest thing about playing the state tournament.
Yeah, I think we're really set up for, you know, essentially, I think we're set up for 8 really good semi-state Saturday night games. I think we have the potential to have, 8 really, really competitive games on Saturday night. And I am, we haven't seen a ton of upsets yet in my eyes so far. So, I'm interested to see, could a team like Delta knock off Norwell? Could a Highland knock off Columbia City? Could a Park Heritage really push South Knox and give them a scare Saturday morning? And then I just mentioned Anderson Prep. Maybe their magic continues and they can, kind of push Northeast Du Bois, or even in that same region or semi-state. Could South Decatur push forward? And so, I'm really excited to see how Saturday morning goes. And it really leads us into what should be a really, really fun, Saturday night with matchups that I think we've kind of been looking forward to all year. We have the potential of seeing Hamilton Southeastern and Warsaw. We have the potential of seeing, as you've mentioned up in your neck of the woods, Norwell and Columbia City. Like, those are the two best teams in 3A North this year. And I don't think it's particularly super close. And they're going to be battling for a spot in the state title game. And same with 1A North, as we mentioned a minute ago. Lafayette Central Catholic, Marquette Catholic. Those have been the two best teams in 1A North all year long. And, they're going to be playing for a spot, to play in the state championship game. So there's a lot of different storylines. There's a lot of things I'm looking forward to. I'm most looking forward to just seeing some really competitive games throughout the 4 classes.
Mm-hmm. This is the 50th year of the IHSA Girls Basketball State Tournament, and as you know, over the years, every once in a while you get some nice magical run here, and it could catch us off guard. And maybe this is the weekend we see something crazy happen that makes Indiana basketball just so unique that none of the other states can replicate that type of magic. But we should be expecting some exciting matchups on Saturday night with some good crowds coming in to rally behind this magical state tournament runs for these respective schools. Mason, as always, thank you for taking the time to spend your precious time talking about these semi-state matchups and helping us become better, helping us become more informed and better understanding about what we could see coming up on Saturday night.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. As always, you do a great job here, and I'm always happy to hop on and talk some hoops.
All right, so that's going to do it for our semi-state preview on the ANC Sports Podcast with Mason Asher. My name is Sam Frick. Have a great evening and enjoy some basketball here in the Elite Eight and later on the Final Four.